Hey guys, so Ben requested that I put together some material on how I do my workshops or seminars and how they're structured and why I do them. And right off the bat, I want to share that even before I became a coach, like an established coach, I could somewhere in the back of my mind see that I wanted to do workshops, right? It's like a faint image I had of teaching in this particular format. And the reason for that is because I have attended workshops and seminars by some absolutely world-class professionals, people like Paul Check, Ido Portal, Tom Wexler, who's a movement teacher, my teacher Ben Medder, and also coming to the expo here, ATG Expo here, and studying under Ben Patrick, Ben Clarefield. So these were very, very concentrated experiences, and I could see myself doing this. And the reason I'm sharing this is because you, as a coach, would have to evaluate and sit with yourself and be like, do I see myself doing a workshop or a seminar? Because it requires a certain kind of a skill set, and it has to be your cup of tea. So this is a question for yourself, and I feel it's an incredible way to communicate and share your work with people. But you have to sit with that thing that, do I really want to do this or not? So I'm going to first go through how I structure and organize my workshops and then the why behind it, right? So the first thing is my workshops are, as I said, we have a clear audience defined, are people who are trying to come back after injury and pain, right? That's my audience, right? When I do a workshop, it's 2.5 hours in general for general population. So it's a 2.5 hour workshop, but every workshop almost overshoots by like 15 to 30 minutes. So you can say that's around 3 hour workshop is what I do if I'm doing an experience. And if I'm teaching it alone, I work with only 12 people. So my workshops are limited to 12 people, right? And obviously there's a particular time and a location and all that stuff. That's different, right? So this is my flow of the workshop. The first thing I start with when people come in is I take them through a stillness practice, guided stillness practice. It's like a 7-8 minute practice where I bring their awareness to the breath. Then I basically like bring their awareness to the knee. Then I bring their awareness to one knee and one sensation that stands out, usually something uncomfortable in that particular knee. And then I start to zoom back out, and then basically I bring in a context of saying that why stillness is a critical part of a healing journey, and I give them a certain practice, which is the practice of microdosing stillness in their lives, right? So this is like a 10 to 12 13 minute or 15 minute set where I am basically just teaching stillness in a bulletproofing workshop. My workshops are titled Bulletproof Your Knees for Life. But when a student comes into my workshop, they're doing like 15 minutes of like stillness, and we're talking about something on stillness. And I'll cover why later, right? After this, I spend about 3 to 4 minutes to educate them on my journey. I thank them for coming. I explain to them my journey and the fact that I had injuries and pain. And essentially, I started reaching out to the best teachers and professionals in the world in a hope to climb myself out of it and develop my understanding and interpretation of their systems. And I started to teach, been teaching for a few years now. And I've started to develop a skill set in solving certain types of problems, right? And this is fundamentally there might be people who have just seen the workshop and come, they might not know me well, somebody might have recommended it. So it's to basically build trust and be like, hey, this is who I am, right? Now, if time permits, it really depends, is that I also maybe have all the people introduce themselves once and as to like why they've come for the workshop. Now, I sometimes do it, I sometimes don't. And this is just a choice that you would have to make depending on the number of people you're handling. So that's something I do after this. And then I go about, basically, I speak for about 30 minutes where I lay out a framework of how I think the healing journey should look like and what are the principles of the healing journey. And I take a good 20 minutes to just talk about how I think your healing journey is going to unravel without speaking about the bulletproofing and ATG stuff. I don't get into that yet. I need to be like, hey, you're a human being who's trying to heal. And you have all these different systems and modalities to heal. Let's put that together in a framework that you can work with. And that has been very honest with my own journey navigating through chronic pain and stuff, where my chronic pain issues had to be resolved by basically working on going on spiritual journeys, working at a psycho-emotional level and stories in my head and the way I was processing emotions, and also making very big changes to my diet. So I have to be honest to that, hey, I am teaching you this bulletproofing stuff, and it's a very, very potent recipe. It's probably one of the extremely potent, yet I want to bring in this perspective that there are many different layers to healing, and sometimes some other things have to be healed first before this thing really kicks in. And once I've communicated the stillness perspective and the holistic health aspect of healing and pain, that's when I get into the nitty-gritty of what are we trying to do in this workshop and what is the heart of the puzzle, which is the bulletproofing stuff, right? And this is obviously heavily inspired by the ATG system, right? So here I explain to them that, hey, bulletproofing is basically a well-rounded way of approaching strength training, fitness, calisthenics. We basically have taken a step back. Obviously, my teachers, like people like Ben, have taken a step back and be like, what's a good way to build strong, resilient body that not only looks good, but it also moves well? And explain to them that we are trying to upgrade the structures, right? And transform the structures, right? Here, I also emphasize on the fact that remember that you can be extremely strong, but if you don't know the art of moving well, if you don't know how to shift your weight, if you don't calibrate your eyes with your knees and hips when you turn, and if you're an inefficient, clunky mover, you can have the strongest structures and still leak energy or end up getting injured and plateaued, right? You have to think things more broadly and be like, this is the piece of the puzzle you're working on, like a craftsman. And here I try to communicate the point that there are these different systems and perspectives on how we can approach movement and healing. And we are working on this piece of the puzzle, which is a pure structural hardware upgrade, right? Get brutally strong tissues, work on the strength, length, and the quality of the tissue so that you can generate more or absorb more forces in a certain position. And this is what we are trying to work on, right? This is the piece of the puzzle, and we have a very well-rounded approach. Around here, from this point on, again, I talk about the fact that there's 3 principles I wanted them to take home, and I try to communicate the workshop in the form of 3 principles. And the first principle is something I call as nirvana strength, right? This covered earlier in the workshop, and this is about mastering regressions. And I clearly communicate that I don't want any aggravation of symptoms during this particular session that you're doing, and you're not trying to achieve anything, you're just trying to understand things deeply. If you're not able to do a particular movement, even at the basic regression, you don't have to attempt it. You take a step back. We are trying to not achieve things in this workshop, but it's only when you go back and apply these things over an extended duration of time that you're going to see results, right? So that is that nirvana strength principle. And then we start to train, right? The training starts around 40 minutes in of a 3-hour workshop, and the first 40 minutes are laying the foundational principles. So after we've laid that foundation, it's all action. So I start to introduce them to the practices. I have 2 stations running in parallel, 6 people on each side. And if I have an assistant coach, then I work with 18 people. So it's like 9 each side. And obviously you need more equipment. You need to make sure that you have all the equipment in place. And then I'm basically teaching people the tibialis, calf raises, and the ankle and foot exercises on one, and the other set of people are working on the sled, right? Once that is taught, and obviously I teach both of these stations as to what to do, and they swap over so that the 6 or 9 people can work on the other station. Now, once that's done, I give context on why these movements are potent in terms of like what are they going to add to your body. So if you're speaking about the sled, I explain to them that you're getting an insane amount of blood flow, no impact, and putting forces through the leg. You're building from the ground up, restructuring the foot, ankle, knee, and hip, rebalancing all the talking points and why I found the sled beneficial with me and my students. So I communicate that. And usually if there is any pushback on equipment or something, which usually is, then I kind of enforce the point that sometimes you just got to get the equipment, right? That we'll cover later. Once we have done that, those 2 stations are done, then we move on into the next stations, which is basically I have a station where I'm working on the tibialis raise, but loaded, and with the hip flexor raises. So there are 2 movements that the 6 or 9 people are going to practice. And there's another station happening parallel where we are working on the step ups, Paul Patrick step ups, along with hamstring bridge raises. So you're working on the knee there. So again, I teach them how to do the movements, and these 2 stations are working in parallel, and they switch over. Once that is done is when I communicate the why behind these movements. And I'm like, okay, you've done these movements. Let's talk about why these movements are beneficial and why we have done them, right? Once that's done, we basically move on into principle number 2, where I speak about structural balance, connect the dot with building from the ground up. I connect the dot with essentially the triple flexion versus triple extension concept. These movements they've already done so far, and I educate on the point that, hey, we want to make sure that the amount of forces you can generate are being balanced with the amount of forces you can absorb. I make sure to get the point across that you want the primary movers to be like extremely strong, and also you want to make sure all these like accessory and smaller muscles are balanced with that. So these are points I get across. And again, you know this in terms of like, and you got to figure out your way of communicating this. And then once you've done all of this, I take them into the connective tissue dominance stuff, which is the third principle. So after the structural balance, we move on to principle number 3. And I explain to people essentially that when you're doing a partial range of movement like a lunge where your knee is behind the toe or in line with the toe, essentially you are keeping the tension to the muscle, and we're doing it on purpose to avoid the joint. And I explain to them and educate them that the way you build joints is the same way you build muscles, by putting forces through them and not avoiding them. I have a few analogies over here, and I explain to them that, listen, it takes 3 to 5 times longer to build joints over muscles, right? And it is extremely important to understand this. And the magic recipe is how you create a journey for someone so that they're getting that end result and not ending up injured, right? And explain to them that you have to take a very slow strategic approach here. So once I've explained and laid it all out, then they attempt the final movement, which is the ATG split squat. But I make sure it's front foot elevated, it's not loaded. I tell people that you're not trying to impress anyone. In fact, it's to my benefit if you did a split squat with weights in it, because I can take it a video and put it on Instagram, but that defeats the purpose of what I'm trying to impart in this workshop, right? I keep them in check. And there are a few people who actually don't do the ATG split squat because their knees are not ready. And I really, really go and pat them on the back and say that I respect you for not attempting it, because that's the harder choice right now. And you're not letting the ego get in the way of your healing journey. So once the people are done with the ATG split squat, we basically gather around as a group. And again, this is more the tail end of the workshop. So here I start to do some demonstrations. So I take the movement like a step up, and I demonstrate it with, say, 64 kgs, which is around 80-85% of my body weight. And then I take a movement like ATG split squats, and I demo that with 50 to 60% of my body weight. And I explain to them that, hey, listen, when I started these, like, I'm basically even in a worse place than what you might have attempted right now, but I've spent 4 years doing these movements, and the body does adapt, the structures do adapt, the nervous system adapts. And when you're ready, the body gives you more trust. And these movements allow, we are starting at this level, but the stronger you get on them, you get out of pain, and then it can give you an edge in performance, right? I also take movements like the Jefferson curl, and I demonstrate that with like 60, 70, 80% of the body weight, whatever is available over there. And I show them that, hey, we did this workshop focused on the legs, and we did it at a beginner level, but the same principles, the connective tissue principle, dominance principle, also applies for the spine and the rest of the body. And I also take an example of something like external rotation, where I take, say, 12.5 or 15 kilos, which is like, say, 12.5 or 15%, 18% of my body weight. And I show a few reps and demonstrate a few reps and then say that, hey, this is how we take the structural balance concept and we apply it for the upper body and the shoulders, right? To explain and get the point across that our focus is the legs today and the knees today, but this is a full body bulletproofing system. This is a full body hardware upgrade. And the principles that we covered, Nirvana, strength, structural balance, and connective tissue dominance, essentially translates for the spine, the upper body, all your joints, is a good way to prepare your body for your sport and for life. So after all of this is communicated, basically I open up the floor for questions. And even though it's been like, say, 2 hours, 45 minutes right now, and they're like past the workshop time, usually like the questions go on for 15 to 30 minutes, right? And sometimes, very occasionally, I also don't get questions. And there are moments during the workshop where there are questions that naturally come up. And if I feel it's just correct in that particular situation, I address it there during these various touch points and where we take a break. Or if I feel like towards the tail end of the workshop, it should be addressed, then I make sure to ask them to remind me again, and we cover it at the tail end of the workshop, right? And after the workshop, when I'm doing the workshop, I make sure that I'm free for an hour after, because there are 1 or 2 people who might want to have more deeper conversations with you. I make myself available for that. So also make sure that at least maybe the gym needs to be used, but I at least can have a one-on-one conversation over there. A day or so after the workshop, I send all the participants a message thanking them for attending the workshop, for their undivided attention. I also send them my coaching brochure, and I have the first principles of what we covered inside the brochure as well, as a way that they can understand what we did as a summary. And I also send them a base protocol of like, hey, these are the practices we covered, and you can take this particular workout or practice and you can maybe practice that 2 to 3 times a week. And I have that as an unlisted YouTube video. I send it out to whoever's done the workshops. And essentially, this is one reason is because obviously they've done it, so they can continue to practice it. They have some understanding of it. And the second is that a lot of people want to shoot videos during the workshop. And I tell them that, hey, listen, I'll send you this stuff. Just focus on immersing yourself in this experience. So you have an idea idea of how I have chosen to structure my workshops and also the why behind certain aspects of it. But I want to start to round this up and bring certain flavors in that I've not communicated until now. I see a workshop or a seminar, it has to be an experience and it has to truly stand out compared to a group class or a live workout or something like that. This has to be an experience that stands out, right? I might have people coming in from different cities. They've had struggling with knee pain or stuff like that. So I want to make sure that that particular experience that they have, they feel that they have gotten value from it, right? That's why the workshops overshoot. It's like intentional. And I make sure that I'm available afterwards. I'm always available for questions. It's like, hey, you've come here, you've invested in this, and I want you to leave. And I want to give absolutely everything that I have. There's a very conscious choice I've made in why I have put this together in this particular format. The reason is because I have a dogma, and my dogma is that I feel like the answer to your healing journey is education, right? I have worked with many different practitioners, teachers, coaches, and they've been incredible and they've offered me a lot. But over a period of time, I started to gravitate to people who are the best in the world, not only just coaches or professionals, but they also were educators. So they taught me how to fish. They taught me how to think essentially about this stuff, right? And I feel when it comes to the body, when it comes to the mind, when it comes to this inner internal experience that we have, that we interface with the world, I feel like we need to master the first principles, because there is not now a lack of information, but there is too much information, right? So we need to have some foundational principles and we need to navigate this through those principles. Otherwise, we will just get lost. So when I'm giving a workshop, I could have done this workshop in say 90 minutes or say maybe 1 hour 45 or 2 hours, right? But I take that extra hour to explain certain things to them, which will confuse them, which might be too much for them at this point, but that's how my teachers taught me, right? I don't want them to have that aha moment in the workshop. I want them to leave at a very base, neutral level where they are like, hey, my legs are feeling better, but I'm also feeling a bit confused and lost, or I'm like forced to think. That's the flavor I want to give them, because that's what my teachers offered me. And when I look back over years, I'm incredibly grateful to them and being like, thank you for teaching me how to think about this stuff, right? My thing is that if I can make my students independent of me, maybe they were meant to get 75% of the answers in this workshop or from me. But if I teach them how to think, they can at least go and search for the remaining 25% or challenge the way I think, right? So rounding up here, I've shared how my workshops are structured, why I have structured them that way, and how I've tried to keep it honest with my journey and what I want to share with that. And I feel this is an excellent medium for teaching if you're up for it. It is quite energetically draining in the sense that you're putting yourself out in front of people in a very concentrated experience. So even though it might be like 1 3-hour workshop you do once every 2 weeks, I did feel quite drained by it after doing like 6 months of like back-to-back 30-35 workshops. So I was aware that this is a very energetically giving experience, but it has been very, very rewarding for me personally. And I feel it's very, very important to have that in-person touch point with people, and there's a great way to reach people in different cities. People show up on time, there's a very specific intent, and you can go into the heart of things and leave a very, very concentrated, condensed experience for people, and then they can take home and apply it, right? And obviously if they do see value in that, they will reach out to you or they will try to practice these things on their own. And I've seen very good feedback with the workshops. And if you do need any kind of further support from me or something, I'll leave my Instagram below. My Instagram is Phoenix Connections, and you can always reach out to me or to Ben and the others over here. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you put your work out there in this format, and hope this has been valuable to you.